So everybody's been talking about, what Kevin Nash had to say on his Click This podcast in the past few weeks, on the past few days, I should say, and how he feels LA Knight is a ripoff of The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin. Now, there's no doubt, Nash has, a right to his opinion. He is a Hall of Famer. He is, basically, um, he's basically somebody that's really left his mark on the business, especially with the run with the NWO, the Wolf Pack, and all that, especially the Click, behind the scenes. And, so again, he has a right to say what he wants to say. There's no denying him of that. There's no denying him of having the right to say that whatsoever. So for him to come out and basically say that LA Knight's a ripoff, you know, hey, he has years in this business that any of us that want to have any part in this business in some capacity can only dream of. So he has the right to to say that, because when you do look at LA Knight, he does take a lot of inspiration, obviously, from The Rock and from Austin, in his mannerisms and the way he talks and stuff. Um, but a lot of people, in defense of that, have come out and said that is that no different than the NWO being an offshoot, a ripoff, if you will, of a very established entity in New Japan? Is that any different than DX being a ripoff of the NWO, but with a more cooler factor and more focused on younger talent? You know, is that is that is that any different than Evolution basically being a more modern day version of the Four Horsemen and such? You know, a lot of people have come out and basically made comparisons to other groups, other stars that have done something similar. Hulk Hogan pretty much being a more 80s modern day version of superstar Billy Graham. Same with Jesse the Body Ventura. Ric Flair, of course, patterned himself off of Buddy Rogers and Gorgeous George, and so on. So, everybody is correct in saying that despite Kevin having the right to say what he wants to say based on his experience, that, it's no different than anybody else, even during his time in the ring, pretty much, pretty much ripping off, you know, ripping off somebody else or taking inspiration from somebody else. I mean, look what WWE did when Nash went to WCW. They wanted to fill that Diesel void. So what they do, they took Glenn Jacobs, who was just recently before that, who was recently before he was given the fake Diesel gimmick. Glenn Jacobs was, Isaac Yankem DDS, and then they gave him the Diesel moniker to fill that void, to fill that missing piece, if you will, that they had lost to WCW. The same with the guy known as Big Titan. They brought him in and said, hey, we're going to make you the new Razor Ramon because, we own the rights to those characters, so we're going to utilize those characters as best we can. I mean, heck, look at what's going on currently right now. You go on the independent scene, and there is a guy, I don't know how tall he is or anything, but he's calling himself Blue Cane. He is basically, a carbon copy of Kane himself. Now, whether it's a comedic act or not is another story. The point that I'm getting, the point that everybody, and including myself, are getting at, is you're going to have, rip-offs. You're going to have inspirations. You're going to have, you know, I guess you could say remakers, if you will, of a gimmick that had gotten, over in the past, trying to get it over today. And LA Knight is trying, and LA Knight, yeah, he's using what he has, if you will. He's using what he has as inspiration to get himself over, because obviously LA Knight, let's not fool ourselves. LA Knight, Eli Drake, whatever you want to call him, was once a fan himself. So he understands, as a fan, what the fans want. And obviously what the fans want is something that reminds them of a time in wrestling that was cool, that had attitude and had ruthlessness. And what better way to do that than to basically, basically, take inspiration from two of the most iconic talents of that time frame, that being Austin and The Rock. You know, why not go and do that? You know, you know. So because if I was LA Knight, see, I was just checking something right there. That's why my attention was distracted. But if I was LA Knight, I'd probably do the same thing. Now, people might say, "Oh, well, the reason that he's not being pushed is because Vince is hung up on his age." It's age is not an issue. Age is not an issue with LA Knight or anything like that. As long as he's getting over with the fans, WWE is going to take advantage of that. They have to. But Nash coming out and saying what he did, he has a right to say that because he has seen, for himself throughout his entire career, people doing this. I mean, people look at the Bullet Club like I do as basically an offshoot, a carbon copy, for today's wrestling, world of the NWO. But what's making Bullet Club, sustainable even a decade later is they change things up. Yeah, they'll keep some original members, but they'll also change things up to freshen it up, like they'll create offshoots, like spin-off groups that's still tied to them, whether it's in New Japan or in other companies, or they'll just bring it, or they'll bring in a new leader for the main group to kind of freshen it up. That is the one thing that the NWO didn't do. They never truly, looked at someone outside of Hogan and said, okay, who could be the leader outside of Hogan? And the closest I think anybody would say would have been Nash when he did the Wolfpack thing. But that was it. That was it. The point is, the point is, presently, past, and even future, you're going to get all kind of imitators. You're going to get people taking inspiration from different talents, different ideas of the past, and implementing them into today's wrestling world. And why? Because they know that back then, if the original act, could get over the way it did, what could happen if you take that act and you apply it to today's world? Sorry about that. Again, my mom's watching Sparkle and she gets stuff every now and then. I think she wants to try to, I guess you could say, hear what I'm doing. Ain't gonna work. But anyway, like I was saying, you're gonna have talents, or groups take inspiration from, other things that happened in the past. You're gonna have that. You're gonna have that happen even into the future. It's happened in the past. It's happening currently, and it's gonna happen in the future. There's no doubt. I mean, look at some of the factions we have in WWE right now, like Judgment Day. Some could say that's pretty much an offshoot, in a way, of Bullet Club, because Finn Balor is the leader and everything, and it has a very Bullet Club-like feel to it, almost. You take a look at the Bloodline, you could say, oh, well, that's kind of an offshoot or modern-day version of the Nation of Domination, but done right. You see what I'm saying? There are always going to be some kind of, different takes on acts that have happened in the past and everything. It doesn't mean they're ripoffs. It just means they're taking what worked and applying, what worked in the past and applying it nowadays. I mean, you can't tell me that in the next 5 to 10 years, WWE or AEW isn't going to take what's going on with the Bloodline right now, and mostly with Roman Reigns right now, and and basically take the next big thing or the next person they feel can fill that void, and put that person in that void and make them a modern day version of the tribal chief, of the head of the table. You can't tell me that won't happen in any wrestling company out there today, whether it's WWE or not today, but in the future, whether it's WWE, AEW, or whoever. You can't tell me that won't happen, because it will. The same with AEW. You can't tell me somebody is not going to look, at AEW right now, and see CM Punk for who he is, and say, hey, we can create our own CM Punk for the future, or well, not just that, but look back at what CM Punk has been in this business, both WWE and AEW. You can't tell me somebody won't look at that, if not currently look at that right now, and say, hey, let's let's do a search and try to find somebody that can be our CM Punk or be the CM Punk for the future. Let's try to find that person because they're doing that. They're doing that. I mean, look what's going on in NXT right now with Schism. As crazy as it sounds, they are basically Wyatt Family 2.0, whether you like that or not. And Joe Gacy is basically Bray Wyatt 2.0. And Bray Wyatt is still under contract to them and everything. But he's basically Bray Wyatt. They're remaking Bray Wyatt, in a more, I guess you could say, unstable, sinister, manipulative way than I guess he was previously, based on Joe Gacy's, resume and what he's done elsewhere, like in CZW and stuff. But the point is, the point I'm getting at is this, people will take inspiration even from talent they currently have and apply it to talent for the future. And like I said, you can't tell me that somebody in AEW or somebody in WWE or Impact or New Japan doesn't see CM Punk and say, hey, let's find somebody in our company, we'll find somebody we want to sign to our company, and let's try to make them into our version of CM Punk for the future. Because they will. Same with Kenny Omega. You can't tell me that AEW, WWE, and any other promotion out there isn't looking at the talent across the board, NXT, Ring of Honor, Independence, New Japan. You can't tell me they're not looking around there and being like, okay, who can we find to be the next Kenny Omega? People, people are in those companies behind the scenes are currently doing that because they know sooner or later those people that I've mentioned are going to have to hang it up, and never compete in the ring again. So they're going to need somebody to carry on that legacy to make it feel like, hey, CM Punk, Kenny Omega, Bray Wyatt, these guys never left. They've just, the spirits are now incorporated into these talents, into these people. That is why they're doing this. And even then, I guarantee you, in the future, people like Nash, Kevin Nash, if you will, like Jim Ross, with all due respect to the guy, they will come out and they will say the same thing about them that Nash is saying about LA Knight right now. And that's a fact. That is an absolute fact. There's no doubt about it. I mean, heck, let's take a look at YouTube, for example. And probably the most prominent name when it comes to wrestling YouTube videos is Brian Zane. With all due respect to JD and Just Alex and Solid Monster and OTR Central, Meltzer and Alvarez and Sean Ross Sapp and Fightful, the most prominent name when it comes to wrestling videos, whether it's reviews of classic stuff or modern stuff or it's analysis videos or whatever, is Brian Zane. And you know what Brian Zane said in a recent video as to why he created, Wrestling with Regret? It's because he looked at what was going on with AVG and James Wolfe, the Angry Video Game Nerd, and nostalgia critic Doug Walker, saw what they were doing for video games and movies and shows, respectively, in those genres, and said, why not? We don't have one for wrestling, so I'm going to make one for wrestling. And guess what? He's taken off since then. And you could look at him as being like a ripoff or a carbon copy of those two. Point is, you're always going to have to deal with this kind of stuff in wrestling. So yes, in conclusion, Nash has the right to say what he wants to say based on his experience. But guess what? This is going to continue even into the future. And there's no doubt about that.